Thank you for coming today. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll spend the next 15-20 minutes to explain what Search Assist can do, obviously, but also what are the problems that you would face when you are implementing the search application. I'll explain what is RAG, what is the basic understanding that all of us have, but what is advanced RAG, right? So what happens is the concept itself, RAG, is like very easy to understand, but when you try and deploy it for enterprise application, that's when it becomes really complex in terms of how do you make sure that you are able to deliver the right answers and what is the journey that you have to go through to create a enterprise ready application. So these are the 5 stages of the life cycle of the SearchAI application. We start with the sources. You could bring any structured or unstructured document. It could be your web pages on your portal, internal or external. You could be documents on your any document repository. And you can also connect your content management systems like SharePoint, Zendesk, Salesforce, everything. So that's the first part of it. You bring all of this data into the SearchAI application. There's an important aspect here is, like one of the analysts from the Gartner was saying, junk in, junk out, right? So whatever content you are feeding in, you have to make sure that the content is the right content that you would like to deliver it for your end users. So what does it mean? Does it mean that you will go to every author who has created the document? That's not going to be possible, right? Like so many people contributing to your Zendesk ticket, so many people contributing to your ServiceNow drive. So what we do is we give you a low-code workbench where every document will go in. Then there are a series of stages that you could use to clean, enrich, or eliminate the data. So for example, you have ingested HR policy document. Like say someone ingested for 2022, then you ingested 23, then 24. Then shouldn't someone remove the older documents? They should, right? Because otherwise you only probably end up giving incorrect or ambiguous results to your user. Or someone would have created, like say typically the problem will be with websites where you also extract a lot of other HTML elements which are not relevant for actually generating the answer. Or you might want to augment the workbench to add additional data. So I have an example that I'll show. So that's the idea of the content workbench. You can write rules to clean up the data, enrich the data, or to eliminate the redundant data. The other advantage is we also have LLM-powered stages. What it means is you could engage a large language model to probably like summarize the entire page. Let's say you have a 100-page document and each page could be like anyways between 500 to 600 words. And sending all of these to the large language model every time could be expensive. So what you could do is you can actually create a summary of the page content, create like a 100 word or 150 word summary and add it to your chunks. So that way you're kind of summarizing the entire page into smaller snippets by using large language model. Then you have the content retrieval. There are different strategies that you could employ to retrieve. I again have some examples. One of the important things is contextual retrieval. For example, if I say, how many leaves do I have? So that's one question, it's a good question, but followed by saying that, how do I apply? In the second question, user is not saying that, how do I apply for a leave? Right? So the systems should be contextually rephrase and understand what the user is saying. So all of that happens during the content retrieval stage of rephrasing the user query, retrieving the right documents. And then from an answer generation perspective, we allow people to use the extracted content and send it to the end user as is. Probably it will not be formatted well, but you can present it as is. But you could also employ again another large language model to summarize the answer and present it in a readable format to the end user. Again, to integrate with LLMs, we support pre-built integrations with Azure, OpenAI, Anthropic, or you could bring your own model. And the next quarter, we are also launching our own fine-tuned model for answer generation. That's the ExoGPT answer model. So here is this. So it should be available by end of June. So it's already in the QA process. So end of June, but most likely before that. So this is the basic RAG functionality that all of us understand, right? So it starts with you bringing in the document, like I said, directory web page connector. You could sync the content and all of that goes into extracted chunks. So the white arrows are the design time. That's where you bring in all of your data and then you create a vector DB here. Now on the other side, when the user interacts from any of the channels, web, social media, voice, any other, then that comes in. We transform the query, like in the example I said, then we identify what are the relevant topics for the question and then we engage a large language model to generate the answer. This is very simple. Right? This works. For most of the use cases, wherever you read about a RAG, this is what they say. You index the document, you get the user query, retrieve the right one, engage an LLM, and generate the answer. Then I'll give you a couple of examples where this can become a problem now. Let's say this is the document that we are trying to ingest. I mean, this is one of our documentation page. This is talking about user prompts. How do we write prompts in the system? And there's a bunch of explanation of this. So what happens is when you ingest a document, you have to chunk into smaller pieces so that it becomes easy to retrieve them when required. Let's say first, when you apply based on the number of words, let's say it gets chunked into three different sections. Now, I would like to bring your attention to this stage. As you are chunking based on the number of words as a criteria, the chunk can get disconnected anywhere. So there's no control to say, hey, this is my chunk, this, because no one is manually going to do hundreds of pages chunking, right? So here, as you see, the title called prompt editor, it got moved to the previous chunk. And the next chunk where the actual description is available, this chunk does not have the title of prompt editor. So this becomes a problem because when I try to retrieve the chunk, I'll see that, let's say if someone says, how many tabs are there in the prompt editor? So that is fine if it's everything here, but if I say, is there an advanced mode for prompt editor? They are in two separate chunks now. So depending on how the user query is formed, you may not be able to retrieve all of the chunks. So this is like one such problem, right?
So one quick point here is the chunking strategy. So typically in simple RAG, what we do during chunking is go by the number of tokens. In a general English, you assume each token as a one word. So when you say tokenized for 200 tokens, assume that I go from first word to 200 words, cut that as one chunk. 201 to 400 is the second chunk. So literally the token versus word is a slightly tricky thing. OpenAI wise, what they do is one word is split into two tokens. 75% of the word is taken as a one token and rest of 25 is taken as a second token. So that's why in RAG we use the term tokens whenever we are talking about chunking.
This is a good point because I think yesterday or today, or Google or Anthropic announced that there's going to be 20 million tokens. It's going to increase
the context size.
The context. Does that help us or not?
No. So there are two aspects to it, right? So even though they increase the size of the context, there are multiple research studies that tell you that the longer the context, higher the probability of hallucination.
Higher the probability of what?
Hallucination. So
if the context increases, the size of each chunk will also increase.
we can choose to have larger chunks, but so good.
See, these are two different things. The context window which an LLM can accept is a separate part, and this chunking strategy is a separate part. Okay. So you chunk with a separate strategy, and you might take 3 or 4 or 5 chunks and send it to, or 10 chunks also, and send them to LLM. Now this group of 10 chunks along with your prompt that you are adding, right? You might add, hey, behave like a AI assistant, ensure that you do not, you answer only from the context that is provided. So all that is the prompt instruction along with top 10 chunks that you might have, the RAG solution might have shortlisted. So when someone asks for, explain me what are the various user prompts that Core supports, maybe the first one will be ranked number 1, second 2 and 3. So 3 chunks will be shortlisted, but you can decide to send only top 1 or top 2 or top 3 to the LLM. So whenever Google or Anthropic or ChatGPT talk about 1 million token, 50,000 token models or 16K models, they talk about how many tokens they can accept as an AI. Okay, so you can decide how many you can send. But as Santosh mentioned, yes, they can accept, but imagine throwing a complete book at you and asking you to answer. You will take time, right? and there could be a miss because there is a pressure on responding faster, you might also commit more mistakes. But if I give you a very close-ended question and with a close-ended context, you can answer better, right? So that's where RAG is very useful, where it tells LLM that this is the only context and answer from there. But if I throw books at it, then obviously there will be problems. So, but yesterday, sorry Santosh.
No, please.
Yesterday there was an interesting thing that I read on Claude 3 Sonnet, which is the latest model from Anthropic. 7 Harry Potter books were ingested in the context and asked them to generate a graph of all the characters and their relationships. It was able to do it from 5 books, it left 2 books, but whatever it could identify, it was able to entirely draw the relationship between all the characters from all the 5 volumes of Harry Potter. So, yes, it is possible but with more models, but then the time that it takes to generate that will also be something that we need to take.
Yeah, there's also the cost angle.
Yeah.
So
I'm sorry. The other thing that I want, the strategy to chunk. I have a use case that I use a different platform, and we ingest a lot of documents, and the client want to have the exact procedure. It's like procedures. Do this, then do that, and then do that. So you cannot really summarize it. You cannot really. You have to be accurate. What you're going to respond. So what is the strategy? To jump.
So that's where advanced RAG comes in. So he is talking about the limitations of simple RAG, where you are just going by the tokens.
Yeah.
So I don't care how the structure looks like. I don't care whether it is a set of steps. I don't care whether it is bullet points. I just go by the number of words and cut and then take it. That is simple RAG.
I see.
That's where there are a lot of limitations, because of which you need to involve some advanced techniques for solving simple problems.
So, but you offer more sophisticated routes.
right.
Yeah.
Or they have
Not
Right.
just us. There are some capabilities even in open source, but definitely we make that more simpler to use.
So is there any reason for the 75-25?
No, I think that's more like an example. Yeah.
So it's not random. I think when they are fine-tuning the models, they have experimented in a multiple ways, and they felt that this is the right way. In fact, the 75-25 that I am telling is applicable only for English.
Oh, so that's
Okay, so if you use Arabic, Hindi, or some Indian languages,
Portuguese.
non-ASCII characters, non-ASCII base. So Portuguese is again 75.
Is it what?
75-25. So what they do is this one word, for example, ordered is 3 plus 3, 6, 7 characters. So they cut that into order and ed as 2 different tokens. So you are charged for 2 tokens even if you give one
No,
word.
I mean, that's like a general example, but they actually look at the phenoms.
I know Indian languages are very.
So for Indian languages, sometimes just 3-character word is split into sometimes 6 tokens.
I mean, even in the English, depending on the word, depending on the number of syllables it has, it will have more than one token generated.
So it's 75-25 is just an example, guys.
Yeah.
So they have not explained the reasoning why it is, but there are a lot of public open source token viewers. So you can take your paragraph and put it in it visually. It will tell what are the total number of tokens that this paragraph or a page has.
But just from a cost standpoint, does the number of tokens, I think you were starting to talk about that.
Right.
Yes.
Does that increase, what is the commercial value, what is the commercial impact?
So all models are usage based, and usage is based on the number of tokens consumed when you make a request and the number of tokens the model is generating in the response. So when you include larger context, obviously the cost will be high because the model is expected to process all of those tokens.
And with our advanced RAG strategies,
So
we are looking to
idea is to concise the number of chunks so that you don't, one, the model does not hallucinate with too much context. Second is your control on the number of tokens that you're consuming.
Plus latency. So all three aspects is trying to
Cost, latency, and
quality.
Quality assurance.
Also, one more question. On the number of chunks, right? Or
Tokens.
if you have a lot of chunks, is also a problem.
It is-
very small.
It is also a problem. Right.
So that's what I was thinking.
So that's where I was saying, like, deploying RAG requires us to have a defined process of expecting, hey, here are the kind of questions that my users ask, and here are my responses, and then you should have a test strategy to verify it.
So that's where we have to tweak.
Correct.
That's where our
Huh.
system comes to tweak.
Correct.
Where is what kind of content
Correct.
has need to be. So
Correct. And that's where you need a tool so that you could tweak, because there are so many applications out there that can do a simple RAG, but when you want to deploy it to an enterprise ready RAG, you need the tool to manage all of it. That's where I'm going to show now. So this is where the workbench will come into play. For example, in this case, what we could do in the workbench is we can take the title of the page, which is user prompts, and then we can add it to every chunk that has been extracted. So because otherwise, if I'm only looking at the last chunk, and if the user's question is, what are the ways in which I can write user prompts, right? But the last one does not speak anything about the prompt or the ways of writing the prompt, right? The title is here. If you've split the document, and if the title is somewhere else, then you will not be able to connect these two. So
it's not grouped together like a category or something, or grouped around the user prompts.
you may not, right? Because you don't know all possible documents. So you're just chunking them. Then what we give is a workbench there. You can enrich each of the chunks with the metadata of the document.
Almost like tagging the
Correct, exactly, right. So this is one such example. The other example I have is, so this is what, like, in the workbench you could do. It's again low-code workbench. You could go ahead, create a stage, and say that, hey, always add the document title as the chunk title. Right. So once you do it, when you go through the workbench, every chunk will be enriched with the document's title into it, so that the retrieval becomes better.
So you
Sorry.
can go back.
Yeah, sure.
So the script, what is the script?
It's JavaScript. JavaScript.
Or JavaScript?
JavaScript.
Can
Yeah.
you show me one example?
I will. So let me go through it and then I'll show the flow. So this is another example I'm trying to show. So let's say you are trying to use it for your employees, where they could ask questions about the HR policy. So your employee will ask a question, it will go through the document, it will generate the answer, which is fine. Now let's say you have employees in two different countries. Let's say you have employees in India and you have employees in US, and each of these teams has different HR policies. Now what do you do it? So the first first suggestion would be, why don't I create two such applications? Like, why do I need to put everything into one? I'll create one for India and one for US. Fine, that works. Maybe there's some maintenance overhead, but it'll work. Now, let's say there are some global policy documents. Now what do? Would you now start copying it into each of the country-specific documents? And what if you have operations in 10 different countries, right? So that's where you will have a problem, right? So you need to have a tool that can meaningfully identify what is the relevant content for a user. So that's where, again, the business rules functionality of the SearchAI will come into play. So what you could do is, you could pull all of your documents at one place, and then you could use the low-code business rules concept to identify who is the user and what are the documents that the user is eligible for, and generate the relevant answer for the user. Okay, this is again the UI for it. Like we had the workbench UI, we also have the business rules UI, where you could come again low code, you could come and write rules. Hey, if the user profile says the user is from location India, then qualify the documents which are only for India policy.
How do you know the context of the query that's coming?
So,
Where is it coming from? Is it coming from USA?
good question. Right, so I'll give a slightly different example and then I'll answer your question. Let's say, assume that a user is on the website. Let's say LG uses our search, let's say user is on the website. I am looking at a television. I open the chatbot and I ask, what is the warranty? So contextually, user is asking, what is the warranty of the television that I'm viewing? But nobody says that, right? Because I'm seeing on my screen, I'm just saying, what is the warranty? So and like say user switches to like say mobile or like a refrigerator, and now the user says, is it power efficient? Now again the question is about the refrigerator that the user is seeing. So so these are the two examples. One we discussed about an employee scenario. Second we discussed about a consumer scenario. What we do is there is something called as a built-in context management in the application. So there are different buckets of information. So whenever we get a query, we also take the input of the web page from where the user is accessing it. So you have the page context. We also maintain the search context, which is what are the search queries that the user has previously asked for. So all of them come into the SearchAI application. On the employee phase, let's say if the user is using MS Teams or Slack, because that's where most of the employees start interacting, then the profile information that you have in your Teams and Slack will also come into the platform. So all of the context information, whether it is the channel from where the user is accessing or the profile, the email address of the user, location of the user, all of them will come into the SearchAI application. Those are the fields that are made available here, like you see user context.profile and everything. So you could use that information, create a rule and qualify the right documents for the user. Okay. Now, so I'll just go back to the basic RAG. So this was what we saw. Now, then we saw the problems that we would have. Then what we have done is we've built the advanced RAG capability. So there are, sure.
So going back to that profile
Mm-hmm.
thing, right? So let's say I'm a business traveler and I'm traveling.
Mm-hmm.
I live in the United States, but then I'm in London, and I'm looking for a refrigerator,
Right.
right? But my laptop is my browser is configured to the USDN and all these kind of things. How would I provide you context?
That's fine, right? Because in that example, I think like the two separate scenarios. One, you as a user. Second is the device through which you're accessing. So for this query, where what is it power efficient? We don't need to know the user. You only need to know the web page, because that's where the product that the user is viewing is available. On the employee side, whether you are like if you are based out of the US and you're traveling for London, but you're still using your email address. That's where your Slack or Teams would be connected. So you would still get the same employee information from these channels.
And I can merge that with HR data.
Yes, you can. Right. So another advantage, it's a very good question is because of the unified application where we're bringing all of them together, whenever a user query comes in, it all goes through something called as experience flows. So as part of the experience flow, you could make calls to your HR applications as well to get the metadata of the user and enrich the context. So, and then it goes to the search. So by the time we try to retrieve the documents or generate the answer, we know everything about the user already.
I guess this is a question that I pretty sure know the answer, but just
Sure.
to confirm.
Yep.
This is you have on the right side you have the user interface.
Mm-hmm.
I can have a system. I can have
Correct. Anything.
of course, yes.
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
The API is something that is will add.
Okay.
There is a public API.
Yeah. So I don't know how to.
Or you can fund the
Yes. Would you know how to turn on the light?
So we have
This one.
APIs for
Oh,
both
okay. There, right. Thank you.
data also. So you don't want to use our interface to use this data. You have a public API with which you can put data into. So you have already done some extraction outside. You have chunked outside, and you want to ingest the data. You have a data API to ingest the data publicly, and even the queries. You may not want to use our SDK. You have some other SDK. Or it could be even non-client facing, it could be some other facing.
Exactly.
You could fire an API and get the chunks if you want, or as some customers what they are doing is they are searching, they are not making the OpenAI call from SearchAI, but they are making a public API call, getting the top chunks, doing some other processing, whatever they need, and then they are making the generative AI call. Or they could even make generative AI call to their own LLM.
This is my case.
Yes. So that
Okay.
can be done.
So this is the full-scale advanced RAG platform that the SearchAI provides, which is enterprise ready. So I'll highlight the key differences. So the first is the ACL policies. So this is again very important, especially if you're deploying it for your enterprise employees. Let's say both, like all of us, Josh, Girish and I, we all at Kore, we use Google Drive, where we create all our documents and keep. And there are some documents that are shared with Girish, some are with me, some are only for me, and some are with Josh. Now, when you are indexing, you are creating a common index for all of the content, right? But when I ask for a question, it should only come from the documents to which I am either owner or is it shared with me, right? Now, how do you manage it? All of the content management systems like SharePoint, ServiceNow, Google Drive, they do provide something called as access control information. So when we index the data, along with the document, we also store the access control details. So we know the access controls of a document. On the other hand, when the user query comes in, we also know the user profile. So,
but access controls can change over time.
yes.
When do you re-index?
Yes, so that's where the content sync engine will come into play. So when the user comes in, we use the user profile context. And if you have a service where for a given user, you can tell me what are the access controls, which is fine, or you want to pass it as per the context, that could also be done. And then when we try to retrieve, we only retrieve the documents that the user is eligible to either view or edit. So that's the two-way handshake that has to be done, both while ingesting the document and also when the user comes in. Now, the second is about the extraction strategies. It goes back to your question, where you have certain documents and you would like to present answer as is because you don't really want to mess up with the way the answer is created. So there are two ways to do it. One is you could use, by default it is text extraction, which is just break it down into smaller chunks. But you could also have intelligent chunking, where we can look for the layout of the document. Like say it could be a troubleshooting guide. I think that's what you're referring to, right? Like these are the steps of procedure or standard operating procedure. So we could look for the format and we can retain the entire chunk as is. So or if there are images, we could look for the boundaries where the image is, take the image. So depending on the type of so we work with Morgan Stanley and a few other customers, and they have a lot of financial analysis reports. You know the financial analysis reports, right? They try to make it more complex to understand. Too many graphs, too many tables, and the tables have multiple columns, rows are merged. So that's where the intelligent extraction will come into play. So you can understand the layout of the document or a web page and chunk it based on the context instead of purely chunking it by the size.
I do that manually, I guess, yes.
So there are two ways to it. There are some strategies built into the application. When we go through the document, if we come across the format, the platform can automatically do it for you. Or if there are very complex documents which you're not able to handle it through the platform, you could also use external document understanding tools like Azure Kore.ai or AWS tools. And once you extract, you can bring those chunks into the platform.
Also, you can do that task.
Yes.
Just for that part.
Yeah, you could just use any other external tool and push them directly into the system.
What kind of tool would be that?
So there are many tools available. Now, there are many tools available that help you to extract the content from documents. Like Adobe has a very good document extraction engine. Adobe?
Adobe.
Yeah. So you could use those to understand the document. Once you get the content, you send it to searches. You don't have to give the original document.
Some of our customers have contracts with Adobe, so they use Adobe.ai. Some are using Google.ai. So you could also use it on this extract. So we just want to be at Kore, we don't want to be a closed-ended solution. We want to be wherever there is some other expert would also be available, we want to be present. So that's why we ensure that we provide something that we can do it, and we allow extensibility where we can use third parties also.
And you mentioned that it's Adobe.
Yeah, Adobe Document AI, Google Document AI, and AWS.
AWS also has it.
But is there any overlap there? You know, if the client goes directly to these vendors and bypasses?
So there are some document formats where Adobe Document AI does really well. So you could send such documents to Adobe Document AI, get those and insert those chunks.
The classification part of the document is done in Kore.ai platform, or it's done
outside. So
done outside?
Can be done outside as well.
Huh?
It can be done in Core or outside both.
It can be done in Core as well.
Yes.
That's only available in version 11.
version 11. So some of them are available in the current version as well, but they are kind of like advanced configurations. If you reach out to our team, we can help it. But in the XO11, they are all available in the UI. So the other interesting aspect I would like to highlight is about the prompt library. So we looked at how extraction strategies can improve the understanding. Now, prompt library is another interesting element. So whenever you interact with a model, prompt becomes very important. The way you write the prompt to generate the answer is essentially how the answer quality is going to be. So the platform allows you to create your own prompts. So there are pre-built prompts, but you can add your own prompts. Now what we are also trying now building is ability to pick a prompt based on the user context. Right? So instead of using one common prompt for everybody, you could actually go through the kind of question, who the user is, and based on that you could curate the prompt as well. So you could personalize the responses based on the user or the context information. Okay. Now the other important aspect is the caching of the responses. This is again very helpful when you have content which is not frequently changing, right? Like say HR policy, like once in a year they come up with a policy, they may not frequently update it. Right? So for all of those cases where the policies are not changing or the content is not refreshed very frequently, what we do is whenever the model generates the response, we create a copy of it, and that is stored in the SearchAI application. Now when another user, if that user asks for a similar query, like say I ask like how many leaves do I have, and Girish comes in and says how many leaves can I use in this year. Both are similar questions, not exactly, but semantically they mean the same. What we now do is we first, when the user query comes in, we first go to the caching engine, see if there is a similar query, and then we use that response and directly deliver to the user. We don't go to the model at this time. But there are multiple scenarios that are to be handled. One, who decides what is semantic similarity? Right? So then you need to have a way of identifying whether these two questions mean the same or not. That's one layer of intelligence that comes in. The second one is, like the gentleman was asking, what if there is a change in the document itself, right? Then whenever there is a change in the document, we again go and clean up the caching engine. So that's how, whether the user context has changed or the document information has changed, we go remove those changes from the caching engine so that we freshly create the query and go to the model and generate the fresh answer to the user.
Where do you get a signal that something has changed?
So on the content sync engine is where all of this happens. There are two things, like from connectors like Salesforce and ServiceNow, they always give the last updated timestamp. So we get that, we get the incremental data, compare with it, and then reindex and remove any references in the caching engine.
So that happens automatically, right?
Yes.
You don't have to
No,
do anything.
correct. Okay. So the other element I would like to highlight is implementing search is not like one call to LLM. Right? There will be multiple calls that we make. So the first one is, like I said, rephrasing of the user input. Right? So to understand what did the user say, for there we use our XOGPT model. When the user query comes in, we go to the XOGPT model, expand the query to have all of the context in it, and then we retrieve the right chunks. Even for the retrieval, from a vector storage perspective, we offer three options: MPNet, LABAC, and E5. In our lab experiments, for multilingual scenario, LABAC works fine. For English, MPNet, E5 probably behave the similar. You kind of have to try with different models and see what works for you. And then the next quarter, we are also going to allow you to bring your own embedding services as well. Instead of using any of the platform provided, you could use your own embedding service. So that's the second part. And the third one is, once you retrieve the right chunks, then you can go to the third model to generate the answer. So the first model is to rephrase the question, second is to retrieve the chunks, and the third one is to generate the response. Again, for the response generation, you could use OpenAI Azure, or you could use any custom. In fact, many of our enterprise customers today are connecting through the custom integration. The interesting element is, I can take a few examples, like say Morgan Stanley, Ameriprise, all of them, or Citi as well. They have a proxy through which they all interact with Azure AI. Nobody directly uses the public endpoint. Right? So they have a centralized proxy where all of their internal applications come, and from there the calls go to Azure AI. So what they do is they use the custom integration layer, define their authorization protocol, and then consume the services from the models. Or we also have a few other customers who have already fine-tuned a model. And if they are hosting in their own premises or on Bedrock, they can use the custom integration, connect to that model, and generate the answer. And like I said, next quarter you'll also have the ExoGPT, which is the fine-tuned model by Kore to generate the answers.
So Santosh, between number 5 and number 6,
Uh-huh.
that, typically there's also the reference to the caching database, right?
Yes, it will. Yes,
Between 5 and 6.
correct. Before 5. Before 5, if I know we have a cached response, we would not even go to the model.
Right, that's 6, right? That's between 5 and 6.
Yeah, you're right.
And when the ExoGPT comes in, there may not be a need for going to an LLM model 2.
Correct.
All of them could be taken care of in the model 1 itself because we are keeping it all within the walled garden.
It'll be 2 models, both of them within the Kore.ai infrastructure. Yeah,
So we will not be going out.
correct. Okay, so I'll now show the search assist application, how it looks like. So this is an example where I've crawled a web page of the HR policies. I do have some documents uploaded. So this is the example that we were discussing. So what I've done, so by the way, I mean, the extraction strategy is one of the advanced RAG capabilities where you could add multiple extraction strategies based on the source from where the document is coming in, or based on the type of the document, and you can choose how the content has to be extracted. For example, you could go with page level chunking, where each page becomes a chunk, or you could also chunk based on the number of tokens. Now the chunk overlaps is another important tool. Like if you refer to the previous example, where when you chunk the document, sometimes the relevant information for the chunk 2 may not be available because it would have been part of the chunk 1's end of the chunk 1. So then what we do is we do overlapping chunking. So some part of the first chunk, end of it, is used in the next chunk, and the end of second chunk is used in the third chunk. So there's a relay of information from one chunk to another so that each of it gets enriched with the overall context.
This is also another place where we need to throw a judgment and
Correct.
correct adjustment.
Yes. Then chunk browser is also very relevant. What happens is when you bring all of this document, there are two things that can happen. One, especially with PDFs, when you extract the content, the quality of the extraction depends heavily on the layouts. So for example, if the amount is mentioned as $35.4, sometimes the dot may not be extracted. Then the whole meaning changes. So it is important for someone to come to the chunk browser and do a quick check to see if there are any errors in the extraction process. And there's also an ability to quickly edit the chunk right away from the UI. You could go to the edit mode and make necessary changes to the chunk.
Oh, so you can make
Changes directly in the application.
Santosh, quick question on this one. Is there, in the roadmap, is there an ability to add where our system comes and says, these are the areas that you might want to look at because something doesn't look right? Because if there is a 500-page document,
Right.
and you've got multiple chunks here, so you've got 142 chunks over here.
Right.
Can we make it more intelligent to say, hey, these areas, like you said, 34.5 or 345, you might want to take a look at it.
We do. So the way it happens is, you need to have a golden set of what is expected. So what we are now building, is again in the roadmap now is, I as the owner of the content, I could say, hey, here are some of the questions that users could ask, and here are the answers that I'm expecting. Now, in a traditional model, a one-to-one comparison and run the test suite and generate the answers would have been fine. But since you are engaging in LLM, evaluation is going to be different. It's not about the correctness, it's also about, is it adhering to the context? Is it concise? Is it clear? So all of the evaluation criteria against which you would like to measure, that's the framework that we are bringing in. We are experimenting with two frameworks. One is Raga's frameworks, and another is Prometheus. So these are open source frameworks that multiple people have curated and defined, saying that here is how you should analyze the responses from a RAG application or an LLM responses. So you can come in, say that, hey, here is my golden truth. These are the 100 questions. These are the kind of responses I'm expecting, and I would like to evaluate on parameter 1, 2, 3, and you can give a scoring rubric to it. Once you do that, every time you set up something, you train the model, we test it, and we create a graph saying that, hey, on correctness, you are 90%, but on cohesiveness, maybe you're coming down to like 80%.
What is the spelling of the raga?
Ragas, R-A-G-A-S. Yeah.
So this, I think my question was more towards having the intelligence for our system itself to run through the content and say something doesn't look right.
Let me attempt that.
Yeah, sure.
So I think the answer is same what Santosh told. However, I will try to put it in a different way. I need to know that I made a mistake. I processed the document 20.5. I read it as 205. There is no way for me to automatically determine that I have to write something wrong, right? So that is the reason why what he is saying is, if we can create a golden data set, one, Ragas and evaluation. Second, you point at something, hey, this one is wrong. Then we can give you explanation of why it went wrong and how you can correct it. If it is going into, I am seeing that the response that you are looking for is in the 7th chunk, but I answered from 1st or 2nd. What can be done to get that 6th, 7th or 8th chunk to the top 3? That suggestion we can give from our tool. That is there in the roadmap. But the criteria would be same. First, I need where I'm.
Right, I think the user in that search won't have the SME experience. They are not. Somebody has to, some other person has to provide that information.
But I think the question, correct me if I'm not understanding your question right, but I think a base run through of the chunks based on like semantics. So are there a lot of incomplete sentences, things that start with, halfway through a sentence or capital, like, things like that, I think would be something that we want to call out, kind of like when you're doing a Word document.
That's a good
and
suggestion.
everything turns red in the areas where there's misspellings or incomplete sentences and stuff like that, and having that ability to review it at that high level to say, hey, these 3 chunks here seem to start in the middle of a sentence or are missing some context to it, and then that can be reviewed, but not necessarily the content itself, because yes, you need this, you need
Right.
that, but I think it's even at a basic level.
That's right. So that's right. Some metadata level,
That's a very
something where you can actually bring this, or even dollar amounts, like you said,
Yeah.
that is so important because the 35.50 versus 345 is a big difference.
Yeah.
So
That's a good suggestion, though. Yeah,
Another interesting strategy would maybe try multiple chunking strategies.
Mhm.
And then run your regression and see where it is.
So we thought about that definitely. Only problem with such approaches, technically we can make that available in the product. It's not a big problem. Only thing is the amount of compute that will be required. You are running multiple strategies and
So-
then deriving at some suggested thing, so we will need to run multiple times to come up with the solution. Yes, we want to allow that as an A/B testing kind of a strategy which you could use. So we have something similar for regular search, not RAG-based solution, but regular search. We have something similar, but that's not very costly compared to this because you are generating, you are splitting the documents again, you are generating embeddings again, which are all CPU intensive. So yes, we have that in the roadmap. It's currently low in priority only because of the impact on cost that customers might have. But yes, that's how we do and our internal benchmarking to understand which embedding service is good, what is the best token size, standard token size. So we do that automation and the backend while doing the benchmarking and give the default settings. Whatever are defaults that we have are from some benchmarks, but we want to allow because cases might change, so they can do the changes, but using our benchmarks we have set those. But thank you, ma'am. I think thank you. I think that's an interesting idea where we can reduce some of stuff. For numbers is something that we have improved a lot, but there are some cases what is happening is that especially in the PDF files, we have not seen this problem in Word, HTML kind of stuff, but in PDF files, what happens is we don't get a plain text directly. So sometimes when the PDF extraction happens, it misses on some of these stuff because they don't use a specific font there. For Word and Word, Excel, HTML, there is no problem. Such problems will not come in the amounts. But usually we have seen such problems in the PDF. Especially sometimes what we have seen is, for our eyes it looks like a PDF, but it is set of images. And people just set of images and say it as a PDF file. And they say my PDF is not working. Why is it not working? Because it's not text. It's an image. Right, so
I think we have to wrap up some. So this is an example of the.
it's a good point.
An example of the workbench stage where you could use a basic function or completely switch to a JavaScript. You could define on which field would you like to apply the rule. And for example, here I'm saying if it contains anything to do with India, then I can write a script of saying by saying, for example, I'm looking if the document is for an internal use or external use, and if anywhere in the document it says internal use only, then I want to put a tag as internal. Else I wanted to put a tag as external. So that's how you look at the content, and then you create additional metadata. And then when you go to the business rules, I can write a rule where I'm looking for the information, and then I'm applying that, saying that, hey, look at that content type, and then accordingly show the relevant information to the users. So again, you can, sorry, this one. So I'm looking at the information and presenting whether, depending on whether it is internal, external, we can qualify the documents. Now, you could create as many rules as you would like to, depending on the business needs of it, and especially on the workbench as well. You could create multiple workbench stages, and there are multiple stages available here. You can map the fields, exclude certain document, write a custom script, or call an LLM to enrich the content right from here. From an answer configuration, again, there are multiple strategies that you could use to retrieve the relevant information. One is a plain vector-based availability, and on the 30th of April, we are also launching the fusion retrieval or the hybrid retrieval, where we use both the vector model and also the other patterns in the information like headers and everything to retrieve the right content and go to the chunks from there. You also have controls with respect to what should be the similarity of the user input with the qualified chunks. How many chunks, like Girish was saying, because it all depends on how much you want to send to the model. You could also choose the number of chunks that you would like to include. Again, on the answer generation, when we do have extractive answering. So what we do here is the qualified chunks are presented to the user as is, like raw chunks. Probably it's okay for an internal or an employee kind of a scenario, but most of the times, like you rightly said, the chunk would have been split from the middle of a paragraph, so it may not really helpful. So you have to be a little careful about using the extractive chunks, but our recommendation is always to use the generative version of it. That's where you can use any of the LLMs to send it. Again, here you get control on the temperature. I think there was an interesting example yesterday about how important the temperature is about, right? So you get control on the temperature of it. Response length is also another important aspect, especially with respect to latencies. The larger the response you're expecting, the more latency it will be. So you have to be careful again how concise or how elaborate you want to be with the responses. Again, with the like I said, you could use the default or add your own prompts here. From a model perspective, you could also use the XOGPT model very soon. Right now, it's available because it's a staging environment, but very soon it will be available for all our customers as well. I think that's all I had to cover today. I'll be happy to answer any questions.